My name is George. There are things I wonder about. Jacob, the cheat, but nevertheless, who knew the value of things and wanted to have the things of God, God communicated with him. And there was even a point where God wrestled with him and let him live. And Jacob called the place Peniel because of that, because that's what it means. I've seen God face to face and lived. So bear in mind how close Jacob was to God, and that God blessed him with a big family, and he loved Joseph. And the other brothers were jealous of Joseph because Jacob loved him more than the rest, and they sold him into slavery, and they made up an excuse that a wild animal had devoured Joseph and put him to death. And Jacob tears his clothes and said, I will mourn my son until the day I die. No matter how they tried to comfort him, he still mourned Joseph. And it's estimated that he waited another 22 years before he found out that Joseph was still alive. And the brothers had gone off to Egypt because of the famine, and eventually this man that they were talking to revealed himself to them as their brother whom they sold into slavery. They were terrified and said, don't worry, what you intended for evil, God intended for good. And remember, Joseph had seen in a dream that one day they would bow down before him, which they did when they came to Egypt. I wonder if Jacob pondered that and knew that one day we'll bow before Joseph. He's thinking, Joseph is dead. How are we going to bow before Joseph? And that's one thing I wonder. And when his sons, his other sons, revealed to him that revealed to Jacob rather, that Joseph was still alive, what did they say about the incident that they created 22 years before when they sold him into slavery? Did they own up to their father? We lied to you. We've been lying for 22 years. We've just assumed that by this time he's dead or whatever. We lied. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us that they actually owned up. But Jacob must have wondered, how come he's still alive when you told me he was dead? And you brought the multicolored coat covered in blood, animal blood, to prove that a wild animal had savaged him. And for all these years, even though Jacob knew God, 22 years, God did not take the sorrow away from Jacob, thinking that Joseph was dead, by telling him. You know, there were times when God spoke to Jacob or revealed himself in dreams to Jacob. He didn't do any of that. There's complete silence. Why did God not put Jacob out of his misery? And the only answer I have for that is this. It's not for us to know everything. God knows everything, but he doesn't reveal everything to us. He reveals his will as and when we need to know what we need to know. But he doesn't reveal everything. And that's God's prerogative, because he is king, not us. And sometimes you might have to bear a burden until God takes it from you. Or sometimes you might have to bear a burden and God enables you to bear it. I'm sure God must have enabled Jacob through all these 22 years to bear the burden of the loss of Joseph. And he must have been overjoyed, as we know, when he found out Joseph was still alive. In fact, he said, I shall go to see my son. I shall see him before I die. The opposite, of course, of what he'd thought 22 years beforehand. He thought that Joseph was dead. I shall go and see my son before I die. And indeed lived in Egypt and got to know Joseph and Joseph's sons. God blesses, but not necessarily when we want or how we want.